Okay, so today we're going to continue with exercise 127. We're going to work with elevations of our building today. So I know we spent last class trying to catch up and build as much of the building as possible. Today we're going to start using the building that you built. If you don't have a fully complete elevation yet, I still want you to go through the exercise of making an elevation, and then you can substitute in the new version once it improves as you go forward. So today is definitely about making a good quality elevation view, but it's also about continuing to make sure that your model is finishing up. Today we'll do elevations. On Wednesday we're going to revisit your portfolios, which by the way are due in only a couple of weeks. So we need to kind of revisit and rethink those and look through them. We do have class on Wednesday. Right? A lot of people like to think that it's a holiday, but it's not. Right? You get Thursday and Friday off. So I will be here, and hopefully you will be too, but only about half of you probably will be, because that's the way it works. But then we'll come back after Thanksgiving break. We'll have 2 class days where we will do plans and sections of your model. Then we'll come back for 1 more week where we'll do a perspective. And then we'll do one last portfolio review before the final, which is the following Monday after that. So everything ends 3 weeks from today. Yeah. The Monday that your portfolio is due is the 14th. So I like to wrap that up early so that you can concentrate on your other classes. So I always pick the first day. Your time will be from, I think it's from 8 to 10. So it's not a normal class day. You might have something after that in a final or something like that. You will come in on that day. I'll bring donuts. I always bring donuts that day. I'll ask you to fill out a course evaluation that will help me guide and change the course based on your feedback. I won't look at them until after I submit your grades. So no matter what you write on it, it will not make your grade better or worse. So you can feel free to be honest. And then you'll look at each other's portfolios. We won't do a formal review, but generally everybody likes to look at all the portfolios anyway. So that will constitute those 3 hours. I'll ask you to make sure you post the portfolio as well as turn in the actual printed copy of it. So we'll cover that a little bit more next class, but I like to, as we quickly approach the end of the semester, I like to try to warn you that it's 3 weeks and then everything's due. So not much time left. So today we're going to concentrate on elevations. And I do elevations first because I think they tend to be the easiest. They don't involve any section cuts. We just set it up as a relatively plain and simple elevation. So I'm going to look first at my building. And I will be honest and say that I haven't finished the back side of the building at all. So we're going to do an elevation of the front side of the building because that's as far as I've gotten. You may want to pursue something similar if you have one side of the building that's more done than the other side of the building. So this is the front side of the building that I was working on. I did turn off my AutoCAD XREF layer, which is here. I turned that off, so I'm looking just at my view. And I'm going to go to my camera menu, and I'm going to go to Standard Views, and you're going to pick probably front or back. In my case, my elevation is back. You could also pick right or left, depending on which elevation it is that you're working with. The other thing is, if I look at this building right now, it's still in perspective. It's in a 1-point perspective so that all the lines are vanishing. We can see the edge here, so it's not a true elevation. So I need to switch this to be in a true elevation. And I do that by, again, going to the camera menu here and switching from perspective to parallel projection. And by switching to parallel projection, this now looks, as it should, as an elevation view. Okay? What I want to do is I want to zoom in here. It looks like I have an extra little object here. We can get rid of that object. Right? I want to zoom in so that I see my building and maybe a little bit of sky around it. Okay? And I'm going to go ahead and go through the same process we went through when we did the Francis Ching work. Remember, we opened the Styles menu. And from the Styles menu here, we selected the hidden line, which is right here. So there it is. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this view. So I'm going to go to Window and then Scenes. And and I'm going to click the little plus sign here, and we're going to call this front elevation. And it's important that I save this because I'm going to come back to this view at a later time, or if I continue to modify my model and then want to do the front view again. So I'm going to go ahead and rename the scene. We'll call this front elevation. And I'll go ahead and close it. Now I want to turn off, I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to turn off the axes, and I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to turn off the guides, so that what I end up with is just the plane elevation view. Okay, this is what I'm after. And from here, I'll go ahead and go to File, Export 2D Graphic, and it's going to be a JPEG image like we did last time, but I'm going to click on Options and make sure my size is set. It looks like the default stuck on this computer. It may or may not for you, so it's worth double checking. And I may up the size of this a little bit. Let's go maybe 4,000 pixels instead. And then I'll go ahead and say OK. And I'm going to choose where to save it, which will be on my flash drive. And we'll do it in today's folder here. We'll call this I'm going to add underscore lines because this is the line version of it. And I'll go ahead and click on Export. All right, so I have that done. I'll go ahead and go to View, and I'm going to turn on Shadows. And I'm going to adjust. I'm going to go to Window. I'm going to go to Shadows. And I'm going to adjust the time of day. See if I can get something with a little bit of shadow on it. I might have to adjust the time of year. And of course, I picked the view where, there we go. I'm getting a little bit. It has to be really early in the morning to get the shadows. My front elevation is the north, so I'm not getting that much shadow on it. But this will work. We'll get a little bit of shadow there. And I'm going to turn off, so I'm going to go back to Styles. We'll go to Window, and then Styles. There we go. And I'm going to turn off a few things. So I'll go to Edit. I'm going to click on my first option here and uncheck Edges, which gives me just the shadows. That's what I want. And I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And this is Shadows. And I'll go ahead and click on Export. This, by the way, is all written out on the course website. If we go to SketchUp, Styles for Photoshop, SketchUp 4.4, it walks you through all these steps. Okay? The other thing is what I'm doing right now is available as a video in Assembly 10.4, SketchUp to Photoshop and Elevations. I don't have a full write-up of this yet, but I'm working on it. Okay, so I have the shadows. So we're going to turn back on my edges. And I'm going to turn off my shadows. If it stops with its little wait cursor. See, it happens to me too. Well, I guess while we're waiting for SketchUp to come back, we'll start with the other piece of this puzzle. And that is that I need to find an image that will work as a background for my elevation. And this is going to take the most work, even though it seems like the simplest part of this, is finding the right elevation or the right image to go behind your elevation. It's really kind of the challenging part of it. So I started with the Creative Commons search. So I did search.creativecommons.org. I picked Flickr as my search engine, and I typed in Yosemite, and I wasn't that happy. I tried Yosemite Happy Isles. I didn't really like that either. I ended up with Yosemite trees, and it seemed like it gave me some good results. Right? So how you search for this can vary a little bit. I was looking for an image that had some trees in it. Okay, so something like this has trees in it, but it's too close to the camera. So I need something a little further away. So I kept scrolling down here. Something like this might work. right? So I tend to open it in a new tab and stick it over here. You see that I have a bunch of tabs open. Something like this one would work pretty well because all the trees are far away. It gives us a nice place to put the elevation. So I'll open that in a new tab, right? This one might be a little close, but we might be able to sneak the elevation in. Yeah. And so I'll continue down here. And that one's too high. I don't have the ground, so that won't work. That one could be okay, but it might be a little too close in scale. This one could work out really nicely. So the point is that I have to kind of play around with this until I find something that looks reasonable. Right? That one might be a little close up. And so I just keep opening them in tabs, and I'll come back and look at those in just a second. Okay? So I'm back here. SketchUp decided to come back to me. Let me go to View and turn off Shadows. So I have the lines again. And this time I'm going to go to the Faces in my Styles menu and turn on X-ray mode. Right? X-ray mode's not giving me too much. It's giving me a little bit, but we'll go ahead and turn that on anyway. So I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. We'll call this X-ray. And this is one of the things about doing these exports is I ask you to do one with X-ray on and whatever. It may or may not be relevant for your particular model. It might show well. It might not really give you much. And so you have to judge what's appropriate and what's not appropriate for what you're doing. OK, so let me go ahead. And in the Styles menu, I'm going to go back to Select. And I'm going to go to the Sketchy Edges. And I'm going to pick the airbrush with the endpoints, I hope. It's a little bit chunky. Let me turn off my guides again. And we'll see once we export this, I think it'll look a little bit better. So I'm going to call this airbrush. And I'll click on Export. And then I'll come down here and pick the pen gray, I hope. There it is. And again, I'll turn off the guides. And I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. Pen gray. Click Export. Now the nice thing is because this is a saved view, if I end up not creating one of the exports or I end up not liking it, I can always go back and edit it and re-export the file. So we'll come back to SketchUp a little bit later, so I'm just going to minimize it, and I'm going to go ahead and open up Photoshop. And so from here, I'll go to File and then Open. And I'll pick my first here, 127. And I'll pick my first basic lines view. There it is. And you see how everything's a little bit lighter when I do the export because it's larger. Right? If I zoom in, we'll be able to see the lines a little bit better. I'm going to press Control-0 to zoom back out. And I'm going to place in the rest of my images. So I'll go to File, and then Place, and then I'll pick each of these subsequently. And I'll go to File, and then Place. And then File, and then Place. And then File, oops, yes, File, and Place. All right. And so I have all of those placed images. Remember, we're going to change the blending mode on each of those layers. So I'll hold down Shift and select them all and change the blending mode to overlay, or excuse me, multiply. And so now we can see through, right, to our whole building. But we have individual control of everything, right? And so I'm going to move the X-ray and the shadows a little bit lower in the layer stack, leaving the kind of fancy stuff up here at the top, right? The pen and the airbrush. Okay, so let's concentrate first on the shadows here. So again, I'll turn on the background so that I can see this a little bit better. and I'm going to apply a bit. It didn't quite line up correctly, which it should have. Let's see if I can. Yeah, interesting. Took a couple little adjustments to see those line up. Yeah, huh. They should line up exactly on top of each other. I'm using the arrow keys to make a couple little adjustments for these layers since they don't appear to be quite on top of each other. All right, those will work. So let me go back to where we have just the shadows and we have my line drawings. And I'm going to do a dodge and burn to accentuate the shadows a little bit. So let me go to Layer, New Layer. And again, this is written up under Tutorials, Photoshop, Dodge and Burn 1.5. And this is going to be a dodge and burn. And it's going to be a multiply, or excuse me, an overlay. And I'm going to fill it with a neutral 50% gray. I'll go ahead and say OK. And I want that to be directly above the shadows layer. Okay, I could actually rename this to be called shadows. That might be a little clearer. OK, so I'm going to be on the dodge and burn layer. I'm going to use the burn tool. Make my brush a little bit bigger here. And I'm going to darken the edge of this shadow. Make this brush a little bit smaller. Over there. Just to add a little bit more punch to it. All right, we'll do the same thing over here. Or we'll darken it. And we'll do the same thing right in here. Right? So I just selectively worked on that a little bit, right? And we can see that it went from here, right, to there, where we punched out the shadows a little bit more. Okay? If that's a little bit too much, remember I can adjust the opacity down a little bit, and we can get it so that it doesn't apply quite as much. Right? So we have a lot of flexibility in terms of how this works. The other thing is I don't want this shadows layer to apply, the dodge and burn to apply to anything but the shadows. So I'm going to click on the dodge and burn layer here and press Control-Alt-G. And we're going to get this little arrow that sticks off of the layer. That means that this layer is applying only to the layer directly below it. Right? So it's connected together. OK, so I did a little bit with the shadows. Right? The X-ray view didn't provide me with a whole lot, so I'm not too worried about that. It does darken the lines just a little bit. And the pen gray gives me just a little bit more. I think the airbrush might be a little overdone. It looks OK on the screen, but when I'm looking at it, it might be a little bit much. So now we need to concentrate on how this building is going to sit into the environment. Okay? And we may come back and we may do a little bit more collage on the building, and I'll show you that in just a second. But we want to think about how the building sits into the environment first. So I'm going to press Control-0 so I can see my overall scene. And now I'm going to go back and look again at those images that I was looking for earlier. Right? And so if we look at this, it's not really wide enough. We've got a focal point tree, but it would distract from the building if it was there. So that one's probably not a good choice. Okay, so this one is not too bad. I do want to pay a little bit of attention to the general orientation, where the sun might be in relation to where I cast the shadows. This sun is probably a little bit too high for where I'm trying to do it, but the image isn't bad. So I'm going to go ahead and download this one because it might work. So let me go ahead and view the original size here, or download the original size. There it is. Show in folder. And I'm going to copy it and put it over into today's folder. And we'll paste it. And so one of the things that I hope you learn from this is that a lot of times it takes looking at images after you get your export to try to figure out what's the right fit. That one won't work because we don't have enough ground. This one's definitely too close, so that one won't work. This one could work. It's not quite as woodsy as I would like, but this could work very nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and save this one as well. So we'll download the original here. I'll go ahead and copy it. And again, we'll drop it into my flash drive here. All right, so we'll close that one. All right, this one might work. There's not quite enough ground for me, but it could work. So I'm going to go ahead and download that one too. And sometimes it takes experimentation, so having a few options isn't necessarily a bad thing. Okay, that one's definitely too close up. It's not going to work. That one would work, but it's way too valley oriented. We already found that one. You know, this one's kind of interesting. I don't know if I could make it work, but I'm going to download it just in case. Now, in reality, if you were doing this, you would have visited the site, so you would have these photos. You would have taken these photos, and you would be able to use your own photos. Part of the reason that I picked Yosemite in this class as the destination is because there's a lot of pictures of it. Okay? This one would probably work nicely, so we'll download that one as well. So there's plenty of pictures to choose from. You, by all means, don't need to choose the pictures that I chose, but you'll want to play around with which one fits for you. So I'm going to jump back to Photoshop now, and I'm going to go ahead and go to File and then Place, and I'm going to start placing in these images and kind of seeing if they would work or not. Okay? And so it's its own layer here. I'm going to go ahead and move it all the way down in the layer. Oh, I have to accept it. Let me make it a little bit bigger first. Right, so I'm holding down Shift while I do this. As I make this a little bit bigger. Right, you don't have to fill the whole page. You may want to. It's a matter of getting the scale correct. Right, so that's about right. Notice that I don't have nearly enough room up above to show my whole picture, but I'm concentrating on the elevation anyway, not the whole context with the mountain and stuff. So it may be okay. We'll have to play around with that a little bit as we go forward. So I'll go ahead and say OK to this one for right now. Right, then I'm going to go ahead and turn that off, and I'm going to place another one in. Let me go to File and then Place. And you may land on the right one first. You may not. So it takes some experimentation. So let's make this one a little bit bigger here. Right? So this one here, if I look at it a little bit closer, and I look at my building, right? My building, let's say it's 40 or 50 feet wide. It's not going to fit between this and the ridge. And just the scale of the image isn't quite right. Right? So that one really doesn't work. So I'm going to get rid of that one, and we'll try the next one. Right, so let me go ahead and make this one a little bit bigger. So again, I'll hold down Shift. Whoops. And somehow I got into a different transform mode. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And then I'll go to Edit, Transform, Scale. And now we'll try this again. So I'm making this one a little bit bigger. I think we could probably sit the building right about there on the site, okay, which wouldn't be bad. But I'm going to have to deal with these trees being in front of the building, which presents a little bit of a challenge. Okay? And I didn't put it all the way over there. So I'm going to leave this as an example, and we'll move on and place another image. And a lot of times I do this with multiple images so that I can flip through at the end and see which one really fits best. So here's another one. Right, this is the one with that ugly trailer in the background. But my building could probably do a nice job of hiding that. Right, something like that. Might just work out. So I'll go ahead and say OK. And then we'll try it one more time with the last one. This was the meadow view. You go ahead and make this one a little bit bigger. All right, we've got that problem deer in the way, right? So we're going to have to deal with that deer. All right, I don't really mind this deer. That could end up being okay. Would work better for perspective. So we have to keep playing around with what the right image is. Okay. So let me go ahead and jump back here, and we'll start with this image as an example image and see how that ends up working out. Okay. If I don't like it, remember I can copy the mask across so it'll work. So let's go ahead and turn everything off and look just at this image. The other thing that can be useful as an export that I didn't do is it can be useful to do just a general colored image. So let me go back to my default styles, and I'll pick the generic image like this. Let me go to View. Let me turn off Axes and Guides. Right, so that I have just this kind of basic view here. I could even go as far as going to Edit and turning off my edges and profiles, which gives me just the colors, even better. And I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And we'll save this as colors. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to use it as a way of helping me select objects. Okay, so I'll go ahead and save that as colors, and I'll place that one in. So let me go to File, Place. Same strategy here. And we're just going to drop this into the scene. That. And I can then, with this layer, which is never going to actually be on, I can use the magic wand tool right here to select all of that blue really easily. Okay? So I have all of that blue easy. I also need this piece of blue, right, because I can see through that. That's the little entrance. And I'm not going to worry about the ground just yet. So I have this background done. Let me jump. We'll turn this off. We'll turn this layer, turn this layer on. And I can very quickly add a layer mask to that layer. So we'll add the layer mask. Oops. I was not selected on the correct layer. We'll add the layer mask. And suddenly my building appears within the context of this scene. Right? Notice that I can see through here the way I wanted to. Right? And I have kind of a line that represents the bottom of this part of the building. Make sense so far? Okay. If I want to try it out in one of these other views, remember I can take the mask, I can hold down the Alt key, and I can copy it to some of these other views. So now I can turn off various backgrounds, and I can see how they work in the overall scene. Right, depending on the look that I'm going for. You see how easy it is to kind of cycle through once I create the first mask? So let's go back to this first one here, and let's have a look at how it's working. Okay? I can also turn back on my shadows, and I can turn back on these extra little lines, something like that. So we can kind of see, okay, it's not too bad. I need to work on the bottom here that represents the ground and how that starts to integrate with it. And so I have a couple choices. In an elevation view, right, if I were to turn on, say, more of the ground itself, right, this original image, let me look back at it for just a second. Right? If I were to show this, it would be in perspective, not in elevation. And so in elevation, generally speaking, we're cutting through the ground right in front of the building, right, so that we're seeing the things that are behind it, but not what's right in front of it. So I'm going to go ahead and modify this ground. Let me go ahead and turn this back on. I'm going to modify this ground to match up a little bit better with what my idea of the ground would be. Okay? So let me go ahead, and I'm going to create a new layer to work on here. And I'm going to put that layer in front of the background layer, I hope. Let me unlock the background layer. And we'll call this ground. Right? And I'm going to work with kind of a dark gray for right now. And I'll go ahead and on the ground layer here, I'm going to paint. paintbrush tool and make sure that this is in the foreground. Hold on a second. I have to change this layer to multiply because I didn't do that yet. There we go. And let me make sure I'm on ground. And I'm going to go ahead and start to paint in under my building here. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in and spend a little bit more time with this and be careful. Right? I'm going to come in here so that I'm covering up just a little bit. All right, and in reality, maybe I need it to be a little bit sharper. So let me go back here. And I'm going to use my selection tool to make a little bit better edge. So let me turn this off for just a second. And I'm trying to think how I want to do this. I can just draw it. Oops. Helps if you draw it correctly. Continue here. I'm going to hold down Shift to continue. And what I'm trying to do is basically create what would be an uneven ground surface. So it's not just a straight line. Right? So I may need to make a few corrections because I missed a few spots. You could do this with the pen tool too. That would work. All right, so that's reasonable. Let me go back to my ground layer here. And I'm going to go back to where I'm painting. And I'll paint in up to that point. That'll work. And I'm going to move this on top of that layer and turn this back to normal. And that should be normal. I'm going to move this to the very top of the layer stack, like that, so that's in front of everything else. And you see how that changed from being just a straight line to being something that had a little bit of ground to it, a little bit of elevation. Okay? I'm going to take this one step further, and I'm going to use a special brush with my paintbrush that's called the grass brush. And this is one of my favorite brushes in Photoshop. It's right here. It's number 134. It's the grass brush. And we'll see, actually before I paint it, I'm going to use the clone stamp. Well, no, painting is fine. Yeah, it's too big right now, so let me go back. And tell you what, let's do a clone stamp. You guys have used the clone stamp before. Again, I'm going to pick 134. And it'd be really helpful if it showed me the preview size. There's my grass. It's supposed to show me the little preview size of what the grass looks like. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and hold down Alt to copy from here. And I'm copying again just on the ground layer. And I'm going to, it's definitely much bigger grass than I wanted. Make this a little bit smaller. No idea why it's doing that. And I'm going to add just a little bit of grass. And again, it's in that same silhouetted gray color. There you can see it a little bit better on the edge. And what this is doing is it's softening the edge for me in front of my building. I'm working my way along here. And let me press Control 0 so we can see out. And you see how that softened up that front edge of the grass. It's not as stark anymore, but it still reads very much as an elevation with the background scene behind. Does that make sense so far? Okay. So I also have a little bit of extra over here on the white. I'm ultimately going to crop that off. I could elect to crop it off now, or I can do it later, but I wanted to acknowledge that that's there. So if I look at this background a little bit more, I have a little bit of a problem because right in here it would be convenient, depending on where this building is positioned, for some of this tree to be on top of my building. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and go to my layer mask here, and I'm going to go back to my paintbrush as being a normal standard brush. Let me go to my paintbrush here, sorry. Go to a normal brush, something like that. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, and I'm going to paint with white. And first thing I'm going to do is paint back some of the branches here. Right? So you can see that now the branch is showing up in front of my building, right, instead of behind. I need to zoom in and I need to adjust this a little bit because not all of this is branch and not all of it is background. So let me flip my colors here. With this being black, I'll make my brush a little bit smaller, and I can actually go in and I can erase parts of this image. Right? Now, if you guys remember back, earlier in the semester, we did that refine edge tool. You guys remember that part? Okay. So let me go ahead and use the magnetic quick selection tool here to see if I can select my tree. Right? And again, I'm not worried about anything beyond the tree itself. Right? Something like that. Yeah, that's fine. Let me add to it, maybe right in there. Add a little bit right in there. And let me subtract. Sorry, it's Alt. If I can get the right key here. Alt, let me subtract out a little bit there. All right, so I have that done. Again, I'm still on this layer right here. And I'm going to do the refine edge. So let me go to Select, Refine Edge. Okay, and I'm going to adjust a few things here. Feather was 0.3 if I remember correctly. The smoothing I think was 3. All right, and I'm going to do on black here. And I'm going to go ahead and paint over this edge and let it try to refine the edge. Right, and we can see as it's working through here that it's picking up some of the white underneath. See there? That's a good one. Right, and I'm working my way through those edges. Maybe a little bit further in here. I'm continuing to go over it. There you go, that looks pretty good. Let's see if we can adjust that a little bit. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah. Okay, so I've gone over it like that, working through the transparency a little bit. I'll go ahead and say OK, right, which brings me back to this transparency here. I can then use that selection on my mask, and I'll paint it with white. Make this a little bit bigger here. And I can paint through what part is actually showing up. And we're getting a little bit better haloing now. I probably need to get rid of that piece of it. My edge is a little bit too strong. So let me paint again. Step backwards so I have my selection. I'm going to select the inverse, flip the colors, and paint over here. Oops. Helps if I'm on the mask itself. feather the brush a little bit. Sorry, this is the kind of thing where you got to finesse it a bit. There, soften up that edge. All right, let me flip again. I lost part of that, so we'll flip that back. That. I need a nice hard edge against this to get that part back. So we can have that shining through. Flip. And again, I need this, and I need to soften that up a little bit. All right, so the point is, it takes a little bit of time, but now I've got that part seeing through there. Looks like I missed a little bit there of my building. Right, this needs to go back. Yeah, we'll call that good enough for now. Right? So the point is that I was able to pull a little bit of that branch in front of my building, which starts to anchor this into the site that much more. Okay? So I have that done. Okay? Now it's a matter of playing around with, I could leave it as is, right? Showing as a nice elevation right now. But I could take it a step further and I could start to put some materials in depending on the look that I was going for. So I'm going to show you that part of it, but whether you choose to do it or not is optional. And again, this is something that I'll repeat over and over again. So you guys remember back, that was the wrong button to click. Remember back when we were working, we did those tiling textures, right, way back when in Photoshop, these ones, right? And some of you may have saved some that you liked. Some of you may have not. Depends, right? I'm going to use some kind of like a concrete or something, and I have some already on my flash drive, so I'll go ahead and use one of those. And I definitely opened this by mistake. Okay, so let me go ahead and create a new layer, and I'm going to bring in, let me go to File, Place, and I'm going to bring in a concrete of some kind. And so let me go to my Resources folder. I'm missing that. Let me see if I can use one of these. I'm going to have to download one. So hold on a second. Search. CreativeCommons.org. We'll call this concrete wall. Thus far, there's terrible selection of concrete wall. Yeah, this one will work. All right, so let me go ahead and download this one. And let me copy it. And I'll place it into my folder here. All right, so let me go ahead.